So when the virus was first discovered and the deaths first started coming in, the central government made the decision that state governors and state legislation would have the power to make decisions about what was best for their state and people. So this is sort of like what gave the precedent for Trump to give that same sort of power to governors again today. And if you guys have been watching the news, you'll hear that he's considering giving the power to governors to take their states off of lockdown when they think the time is right. Um, like Sloan talked about, there was a massive parade in Philadelphia that was sort of pushed by their state legislation, their legislature. And the reason that the state government pushed this parade was because they thought that it would bring in a lot of morale and money through war bonds to the government. So they wanted to sort of make sure it happened for economic reasons. Within 3 days of the parade, almost 3,000 people had passed away, and 31 of Philadelphia's hospitals, all 31 of Philadelphia's hospitals were full. So clearly it was a pretty bad idea to have this parade go on, considering everything going on. And then again, like another group talked about, St. Louis took very early precautions and were able to flatten the curve. So within, I think, a few months of discovering the effects of the pandemic, they had closed schools, public facilities, and banned public gatherings or assemblies. And so sort of separate from like the explosive spread that had happened in Philadelphia and St. Louis, the curve instantly began to flatten and the spread of the disease was like considerably slowed.
Okay, so I think pandemics are just a really weird thing overall because you don't really think about them much until you're actually in one. And so it's very interesting to juxtapose the Spanish flu to COVID-19. But now that we are in the thick of this pandemic and looking back, there are many similarities and differences in terms of the long-lasting effects. And one thing to note is that travel, media, technology, et cetera, are vastly different from how they were in 1918. And therefore the long-term effects will be different and in different areas, but I believe it'll be with a similar degree of challenge that the nation will face. And in terms of sort of what was not a long-term effect of the flu, it was evidence that social distancing was effective and that having life continue as normal was not good. However, it took a while for the current administration to note this and to look back on what did work and what was a long-lasting effect of the Spanish flu and to implement it into the current situation. And comparing it to an even earlier pandemic, the Black Death, I think there's an interesting comparison there as well because, you know, the Black Death, the plague, killed 1/3 of Europe's population and completely rearranged the wealth. And I think that that's something so extreme that won't happen today. There won't be a, you know, whole revival, sort of, you know, rearrangement of today's society. So in terms of some of the practices, one thing that was sort of a long-lasting effect of the flu was that the White House created a pandemic preparedness plan. And these plans aim to stop, slow, or limit the spread of the pandemic to the U.S., limiting domestic spread, mitigating disease, suffering, and death, and sustaining the infrastructure and lessening the effects on the economy and society as a whole. And so Homeland Security created a pandemic influenza plan, which is parts of that is definitely being implemented today. And then I have a little excerpt from the pandemic influenza plan, that there was increased coordination between different levels and branches of government, improved communications regarding the spread of influenza, hospital surge capacity, mass dispensing of vaccines, guidelines for infection control, containment measures, including case isolation, closures of public places, and disease surveillance were all employed with varying degrees of success. And then Homeland Security focused on medical resources, community disease containment measures, public response to community containment, infection control, vaccination, and communications.
Okay, during the Spanish flu, immigration from pretty much all places was shut down because there was a fear that more people would be bringing the disease into the country. And this basically translated to giving the president or the central government the power to completely shut down immigration in the face of a threatening pandemic. And so the Department of Homeland Security, which is sort of like the people that manage the TSA, have also been recently given the power in a document from 2006, based off the precedent from the Spanish flu, to examine any people or things that are brought from a country that is expected to be the origin of a pandemic. So, not that this would happen, but if somebody came from China today, the Department of Homeland Security has the ability to search their things, put them aside to measure their temperature and things like that. Um, and this was sort of this ability was created from precedent, from the Spanish flu.